Read your message, and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us.
She is buried with nature now. 6 words, typed, sent to a newsroom in Arizona. No signature, no coordinates, no name on the page. The woman the writer was talking about was 84 years old. She had a routine. She had a pacemaker. She had a daughter the country recognizes by her first name. The note came months after she vanished. It said the death was not intentional. It offered nothing to prove the death had even happened. This week, the same channel of communication reopened. New claim, new price, $61,000 for a phone the writer says is hidden in a place only he can find. And the FBI profiler who put his fingerprints on the Unabomber's manifesto read the new message and called it a lie. You are inside quiet record. Tonight, what was sent, what was meant, and the one phrase buried in these notes that the rest of the world keeps reading wrong. January 31st, 2026. Catalina Foothills, just north of Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Ellen Guthrie has dinner that evening at the home of her older daughter, Annie. Around 9:45 in the evening, her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drives her back to her own house. He drops her off. He watches her go inside. Then he leaves. Nancy lives alone. She is 84. She is, by every account from people who knew her, mentally sharp and independent. But her mobility is limited, and she takes daily medication for a chronic heart condition. Inside her chest sits a pacemaker. Beside her bed sits a monitor that her pacemaker checks in with on a regular schedule. Standard cardiac care for a woman her age in 2026. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the Nest doorbell camera at Nancy's front door registers movement. The footage that the FBI would later release publicly shows a person on her porch, masked, armed, wearing gloves, carrying a black Ozark Trail backpack. He raises a gloved hand toward the lens. He covers the camera with vegetation. The feed goes dark. Whoever this person was, he did not move quickly. Public reporting indicates the suspect was in the area of the porch and the camera for roughly 40 minutes before the property fell silent. James Fitzgerald, the former FBI profiler who has analyzed this case extensively, has flagged that detail as unusual. 40 minutes is a long time to remain near a recording device. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker stops sending its scheduled transmission to the monitor in her bedroom. The pacemaker app on her phone shows a disconnect at the same moment. The next morning, Nancy fails to log in for a virtual Sunday church service she watches every week with a friend. The friend calls the family. Around noon, relatives arrive at her home. They find blood on the front porch, a back door propped open, a single black glove discarded near the property. They call 911. Pima County deputies arrive at 12:15 p.m. The FBI is brought in within hours. On February 10th, the Bureau releases stills and short video clips from the doorbell camera and publicly describes the masked figure as a suspect. No name, no identity, just the image. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos calls it a targeted abduction. He says publicly that he has an idea of the motive. He has never said what that idea is. The first letter arrives the day after Nancy is reported missing, February 2nd. Cold TV in Tucson, a CBS affiliate, receives the message through its online tip line. 2 other media outlets receive copies the same day. So does TMZ. The letter opens with 3 words, "Hello, Savannah." It then tells her by name that the writers have her mother, Nancy. James Fitzgerald, asked about that opening, flagged something most people miss on a first read. There is no reason for the writers to identify Nancy as Savannah's mother in a letter addressed to Savannah. Savannah knows who Nancy is. The phrasing reads like a message written with an audience in mind that does not already know the relationship. For the press, for the public, not for the daughter being addressed. The letter demands payment in Bitcoin. Reported figures place the demand between $4 and $6 million. What turns this from another anonymous letter into a credible investigative lead is the detail it contains. The note describes things only someone who had been inside Nancy's house that night would know. An Apple Watch with a white band lying on the floor of her bedroom. A broken light on the back porch. Specific, verifiable, insider. 4 days later, on February 6th, A second letter arrives. Same news director, Jessica Bobula at Cold, handles both. She tells reporters later that the writing style on the second letter matches the first, but the content is different in almost every other way. This one makes no demand. It asks for no money. It says Nancy is dead. It expresses regret. It says her death was not intentional. Law enforcement asks the press to hold those contents for the integrity of the investigation. Cold complies. So do the other outlets that received it. The fact that a note saying Nancy had died existed was known publicly. The actual wording of that note stays private for more than 4 months. On June 22nd of this year, that wording finally surfaces. CBS News and NBC News confirm what the second note actually said. By then, investigators have moved much further. They believe both letters came from the same computer IP address. They believe both were written by the people responsible for Nancy's disappearance. On February 7th, Savannah Guthrie posts a video. She stands beside her brother Cameron and her sister Annie. She speaks directly to the writers of the letters. "We received your message and we understand," she says. "We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." The deadline the writers set for payment passes at 5 p.m. on February 9th. No further communication follows from the people behind those two letters. The IP address that produced them goes silent. Fitzgerald has flagged a question about those letters that has stayed with investigators since the first month. If a stranger broke into a house in 2026 to commit a kidnapping for money, the most operationally secure thing they could do is leave a handwritten note at the scene. Gloves on a napkin, on a piece of paper, on a leaf, a burner phone number written on it. "We have her. Call this number. Wait." That is how it was done in the cases that worked. 3 pages of ransom note were left at the scene of the JonBenet Ramsey abduction in 1996, a case Fitzgerald worked on. Whatever else can be said about that note, leaving paper at the scene gave the writer something tangible the recipients had to engage with directly. The Nancy Guthrie abductor did not leave a note inside the house. Before what came next, take a second to think about something. Nancy Guthrie is somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother. She has been missing for almost 5 months. The reason most missing women her age never come home is not that the evidence has run out. It is that the case slips off the public's radar. The algorithm moves on. The audience moves on. And the people holding the answers stop feeling watched. Hitting subscribe on this channel costs you nothing. It takes 1 second, but it tells YouTube that this case still deserves to be in front of people. It keeps her name on screens. It keeps pressure where pressure belongs. If you would want strangers doing that for your mother, do it for hers. Hit subscribe, then stay with me. Because what arrived at TMZ this week changes the shape of what the public thinks it knows. June 25th, 2026. TMZ publishes a report. The outlet says it has received a third communication about the Nancy Guthrie case. The writer, according to TMZ, is the same person who has been emailing them separately for months, distinct from whoever wrote the 2 letters that went to Cold. This newest message makes 3 claims. First, the writer distances himself from another tip. Earlier in June, an anonymous caller had given a Mexican volunteer search group coordinates for a supposed burial site near Nogales, on the Mexico side of the border. Volunteers searched. They found nothing. The TMZ writer says he is not the person who made that call. He says only 2 people are directly involved in Nancy's disappearance, and they would not be calling tips on themselves. Second, he says he has video of Nancy with the main kidnapper, filmed on what he describes as the day that was probably her last. Third, he says he has names, addresses, and phone numbers of the 2 people responsible. All of it, according to him, sits on a phone. The phone is switched off. Hidden, he writes, in a secure location easy to find if you know where to look. His price is 1 Bitcoin. At the current exchange rate, that is roughly 61,000 US dollars. Harvey Levin, the founder of TMZ, publicly asks the writer for proof, a screen capture, anything from inside the phone that would suggest the claim is real. Levin says he has alerted the FBI. 2 days later, on June 27th, Sheriff Chris Nanos breaks his silence on the message. His read is short. He calls it likely another fake. He notes that his department has already had to balance press coverage rights against residents' rights in this case. including the recent arrests of YouTubers in Nancy's neighborhood who crossed legal lines trying to film around the property. Brian Entin, the NewsNation correspondent who has been covering this case from the beginning, took the same skepticism into a longer conversation this week. He sat down with the man whose career has been built on reading exactly these kinds of communications. To understand why a sitting county sheriff would dismiss a message containing names and a video, you need to understand the man who shaped the public reading of every communication in this case. James Fitzgerald spent 2 decades as a special agent in the FBI. 2 specialties: behavioral profiling and a discipline most Americans have never heard of: forensic linguistics. In 1996, when investigators were trying to identify the man behind a 17-year domestic bombing campaign that had killed 3 people and injured 23, Fitzgerald was part of the team that compared the published manifesto of the Unabomber against older writings turned in by a man named David Kaczynski. David recognized phrasings in the manifesto from old letters his brother Ted had written. Fitzgerald and a colleague built the linguistic case that the 2 documents had the same author. The match held up in federal court. Ted Kaczynski is in prison because of that work. Fitzgerald served on the task force for the 2002 D.C. sniper attacks, working directly with Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose. He consulted on the John Benet Ramsey case. He worked the 1992 abduction of Exxon executive Sidney Resso in New Jersey. He helped the NYPD in 1993 on the kidnapping of a New York tuxedo magnate, also named Harvey Weinstein, no relation to the film producer, who was held in a hole in the ground for 13 days before he was rescued. He also tracked a 2018 case in Norway in which a woman went missing from her home and notes were left demanding payment in cryptocurrency. She has never been found. Across his entire career, Fitzgerald says, for-profit stranger kidnappings of adults in the United States have been almost unheard of. He can count the modern cases. The 1932 Lindbergh baby kidnapping. Bruno Hauptmann took the child from a second-floor nursery in Hopewell, New Jersey, accidentally killed him coming down the ladder, and buried him on the Lindbergh property. The child was found a year later. The early 1960s kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr., Sidney Resso in 1992. The Tuxedo Weinstein in 1993. That is most of the modern American list. It is that short. This week, Brian Entin asked Fitzgerald about the new TMZ note. Fitzgerald's answer was direct. I don't think he's legit. His reasoning unfolded in 3 pieces. The first, why TMZ? If a person genuinely had names, addresses, and video of an abducted woman with her abductor, the rational destination for that information is the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Going to a celebrity gossip outlet signals that the priority is publicity rather than justice. The second, $61,000. In Fitzgerald's framing, that price is too low to risk what the writer says he is risking. If the 2 perpetrators he claims to know exist, and if they have any idea who he is, the writer's life is in danger. Nobody putting their life on the line over a single Bitcoin is doing so for genuine reasons. Either he is lying about what he has, or $61,000 tax-free represents the small payday he is willing to risk it for. Fitzgerald's red is the first. The third, proof. Across every communication in the public record on this case, the 2 cold letters, the multiple TMZ messages, no one has offered what real kidnapping communications historically contain: proof of life, or, when the victim has died early, the deliberate construction of artifacts that prove possession. Fitzgerald used Sidney Resso as the comparison. Resso was shot during his 1992 abduction in North Jersey and died 3 days later. His kidnappers, who wanted ransom, kept up the illusion that he was alive by mailing his Exxon ID and his personal credit cards to the family. That is what for-profit kidnappers do when their victim dies before the money arrives. They simulate possession. The people who wrote about Nancy Guthrie have never simulated anything. Then Fitzgerald said, the part that has shaped his analysis since the first month of this case. He does not use the word kidnapper for the person who took Nancy. He uses the word abductor. That distinction matters to him. A kidnapping, in his framing, is for money. An abduction is for something else. He does not believe this was ever about money. His read is that Nancy Guthrie was taken because the person who took her was fixated on Savannah. Someone who had been trying to reach her, through letters, through public approaches, through whatever channel they could find, and who got nowhere. The children were too well protected. The husband, the same. Savannah herself was unreachable. So the person reached for the next person in her orbit, who was not behind a wall, her mother. Fitzgerald has been saying this since his earliest appearances on this case, including on his own podcast, Red, which he co-hosts with Ray Carr. He believes Nancy died early in the abduction. He held out hope for a long time. He no longer does. And he has a working theory about why the abductor, in his view, has never communicated with the family since. The abductor, Fitzgerald says, may be the happiest person watching this case unfold. Every fake note that arrives at TMZ, every false tip in the Mexican desert, every YouTuber arrested in Catalina foothills, all of it pulls investigative attention away from him. He does not need to send proof of life. He does not need to send anything. Other people are doing the work of distraction for him. So what does the actual physical evidence in this case show, 5 months in? The DNA collected at the scene includes material recovered from the black glove found near Nancy's property. That material has been processed through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database that contains profiles from people convicted of serious crimes. As of public reporting, the sample produced no match. That is not the end of the road. It is the moment investigators pivot to a newer technique. Genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy works by uploading an unknown DNA profile to public ancestry databases, sites like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, where users voluntarily share their genetic information to find relatives. The technique finds distant biological matches to the unknown contributor. From there, investigators build a family tree backwards through public records, census data, and obituaries until the tree narrows to a single suspect. In April 2018, this is how California investigators identified Joseph D'Angelo as the Golden State Killer, a man who had evaded capture for more than 40 years. Since then, the technique has cleared dozens of cold cases. It is slow, it is methodical, and in the right hands it works. On the pacemaker side, CBS News reported earlier this year that law enforcement deployed a piece of equipment in the Tucson area called a signal sniffer. It is a portable radio detector that can pick up the low-power Bluetooth signal Nancy's pacemaker transmits when it comes within range of compatible monitoring equipment. The technology has been used in other missing person cases. If Nancy, or her remains, depending on the assumption, passed within range of one of those sniffers, the device would log the signal. That sweep has not, to public knowledge, produced a positive result. Behind the scenes, the investigation has been complicated by jurisdictional friction. FBI Director Kash Patel has said publicly that the Bureau offered to fly initial DNA evidence to its Quantico laboratory in the first days of the case. Sheriff Nanos instead routed the evidence to a private laboratory in Florida. Patel, on the Sean Hannity podcast, said the FBI was kept out of the investigation for its first 4 days. Nanos has pushed back, saying the Bureau was notified immediately. The DNA eventually reached Quantico. The CODIS result was negative. There have been searches in Mexico. In early June, a Mexican volunteer group called Buscando Corazones Nogales, Searching Hearts of Nogales, received an anonymous tip claiming Nancy was buried near the border. They searched. They found nothing. A separate group, Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, the Searching Mothers of Sonora, had placed missing person posters near her home back in February. Civilian YouTubers chasing the case have turned up human bone fragments in the desert outside Tucson. Investigators tested them. They were unrelated to Nancy. At the 100-day mark in May, the FBI issued a public statement saying that scientific evidence processing and digital media analysis remained ongoing. Patel told People magazine he was personally going through what he described as thousands of videos and tips. He said he was certain the case would be solved. That is where the forensic file sits tonight. Fitzgerald's reading is not the only one on the table. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has publicly floated a theory that frames this case differently. She has suggested the disappearance may be linked to what is known in cryptocurrency circles as a wrench attack. The term refers to a real and growing category of crime in which assailants kidnap or threaten someone connected to a holder of digital assets, forcing the transfer of funds through coercion. Coffindaffer's framing places the masked figure on the doorbell camera as a hired participant, someone executing a plan they did not design, rather than as the planner himself. On May 6th, NewsNation aired an hour-long special on the case hosted by Brian Entin. 3 credentialed experts joined him. Dr. Ann Burgess, the psychiatric clinical nurse specialist whose work with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit helped inspire the character of Wendy Carr in the Netflix series Mindhunter. Dr. Gary Brucato, a clinical and forensic psychologist who has co-authored research on targeted violence. And Dr. Casey Jordan, a criminologist and behavioral analyst. The theory that emerged from that conversation, raised by Dr. Burgess, was this: that the masked figure on Nancy's porch may not still be alive, that whoever planned the abduction may have eliminated the person who carried it out to prevent identification. That is a hypothesis from an experienced profiler on a national news program. It is not a finding by investigators. Sheriff Nanos and the FBI have not commented on whether they believe more than one person was involved, and have not addressed the question of whether the masked figure is alive. There is a difference between what investigators publicly know and what experienced experts publicly theorize. Both belong in a serious accounting of this case. Neither replaces the other. When the contents of the second note finally surfaced in late June, the phrase that traveled fastest was, "She is buried with nature now." Online, the analysis split. Some focused on the word buried as confirmation that Nancy's remains had been disposed of in the desert. Others focused on the preposition. They pointed out that an English speaker would more naturally say in nature rather than with nature. A bilingual listener of Brian Entin's show, fluent in Spanish and English, wrote in to flag that the Spanish word con, which means with, gets used in contexts where an English speaker would use in. Their theory: the writer of the note may be a first-language Spanish speaker. Arizona shares 20 miles of border with the Mexican state of Sonora. The geography fits. Fitzgerald did not dismiss the theory. He has acknowledged that he himself first typed "buried in nature" by reflex when writing about the note, before going back and correcting it to with. He understood why a native English ear catches that phrase as foreign. He also offered a second observation about the phrase itself. Buried with nature, in Fitzgerald's read, is almost an empty statement. Every person who dies is, in some sense, eventually buried with nature. The phrase does not point to a place. It does not identify a method. It does not give a family anything to act on. To him, the writing reads less like a confession and more like the kind of half-poetic statement someone offers when they want to sound like they know something but cannot prove what they know. His read on the second note's purpose follows from that. Fitzgerald believes the person who wrote the second letter was attempting, in a damaged way, to relieve the family. To tell them, stop hoping, she is gone. She is not suffering. You can stop holding on. Whether the writer actually knew Nancy was dead, or whether he was guessing, Fitzgerald believes he was guessing. And then he reached for the case that taught him the cost of misreading a phrase. October 2002. The D.C. sniper attacks were terrorizing the metropolitan area around Washington, D.C. 2 snipers, later identified as John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, had killed 10 people across 3 weeks of seemingly random shootings. At one of those scenes, the snipers left a tarot card, 17 words on the card. 3 of those words were, "Call me God." The phrase leaked to the press, but it leaked wrong. Multiple media outlets reported it as, "I am God." For a full week, cable news brought on theologians and religious scholars to interpret what "I am God" said about the killer's state of mind. None of that analysis was about anything the killers had actually written. When investigators reviewed the original phrase, they traced it not to scripture, but to a 1990 film called Navy SEALs, in which a character is nicknamed God because, as a sniper, he holds the power of life and death over his targets. A national investigation came close to chasing the wrong rabbit hole because of one preposition shift in one leaked phrase. That is Fitzgerald's caution. The Spanish language theory about the Nancy Guthrie note may be correct, or it may be the product of a single bad transcription somewhere along the way. Until investigators release the actual text of the note, word for word, comma for comma, the public is theorizing about a copy of a copy. Fitzgerald has a recommendation for that too. He has suggested publicly that as the case approaches the 6-month mark, investigators consider releasing the full text of the 2 cold letters to the public. Hold one detail back as a copycat filter. Release the rest. His reasoning rests on his own history. The Unabomber was not caught by profiling. The Unabomber was caught by language. David Kaczynski read his brother's published manifesto in the New York Times in September 1995 and recognized phrasings from old letters Ted had sent him. One reader, one act of recognition. A 17-year case broke open. Fitzgerald believes the same thing can happen in this case. Someone, somewhere, knows the way the writer of those notes writes. A coworker, an ex, a neighbor, a relative. Release the language, and that person may step forward. Brian asked Fitzgerald one more question on the broader pattern of all the messages. The real notes, the TMZ ones, the anonymous tip in Mexico. Do the people writing them ever feel guilt? Could the second note saying Nancy was dead have been written by someone who actually did it and could not live with what he had done? Fitzgerald's answer was that, in his career, the kind of person who pre-plans an abduction at this level, who can execute it cleanly, who can stay near a recording device for nearly 40 minutes without panicking, is almost never the kind of person who later writes notes, seeking comfort or relief. Their internal justification, he said, runs the opposite direction. The abductor's logic in his framing sounds something like, I gave her a chance to engage with me, she didn't. What happened next is on her. He reached for the Unabomber as the comparison. When the FBI finally got inside Ted Kaczynski's cabin in Montana in 1996, they recovered private journals and coded writings. Across all of it, Kaczynski expressed regret for only one act, an attempted bombing of a commercial aircraft via airmail. The bomb did not detonate properly. The plane landed safely. He regretted the attempt, not because of who he was trying to kill on the ground, but because the plane itself would have carried families he had not chosen. His other acts, including his first murder in 1985 at a Sacramento computer rental store, he documented in his journals with something close to pride. The kind of psychology that plans an abduction of an 84-year-old woman in the middle of the night, Fitzgerald says, does not later send relief notes. The fake notes are coming from someone else, from opportunists, from people who saw a high-profile case with a famous victim's daughter and decided to inject themselves into it for whatever a quick Bitcoin payday is worth. Brian agreed with one of Fitzgerald's other framings during that conversation, that the actual abductor was, in Fitzgerald's view, a one-off. Not a serial offender, not a professional, someone whose entire criminal life pointed at one target, and the target, in his theory, was never Nancy, it was Savannah. Almost 5 months have passed since Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home. No suspect has been publicly named. No arrest has been made. Nancy has not been found. The Pima County Sheriff's Department describes the investigation as actively ongoing. The FBI says the same. The reward is now over $1 million. The Guthrie family announced that figure on February 24th. The FBI is offering up to $100,000 on top of it. The family has also donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, in Nancy's name. On June 23rd, the morning after the contents of the second note became public, Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show. Her co-anchor Craig Melvin introduced the segment. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz delivered the report. When it ended, Savannah spoke briefly into the camera. No matter how much I try to come out here every day and smile and find that joy, and I will, I promise I will, this is a moment to tell you that we need your help. We're begging for your help. And so please, if you're watching, no matter how small, the reward is there. You can tell us. It can be anonymous. Please do the right thing for us, for our family, for our children. We love our mom, and we'll never stop looking for her, ever. That is the public state of the case, as of this recording. What is true? Nancy Ellen Guthrie, 84 years old, was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills sometime between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. 2 letters arrived at a Tucson news station in the days that followed. Investigators believe both came from her abductors. The second said she was dead and expressed regret. No body has been recovered. No suspect has been named. What is theory? That the abduction was driven by an obsession with her daughter rather than by money. That the masked figure may have been a hired participant rather than the planner. That the writing in the notes may carry a Spanish-language fingerprint. That the masked figure himself may have been eliminated by whoever sent him. What is invention? Most of what is circulating about this case on social media. The pacemaker did not transmit fear responses or sedation patterns. There has been no confession, no interrogation, no recovered device casing in the desert. No second perpetrator named in any official capacity. If you have seen any of that on another channel, ask the channel where it came from. If you have information, anything at all that has been sitting in the back of your mind for months and never felt important enough to call about, call 1-800-CALL-FBI or call the Tucson 88 Crime Hotline. The numbers are in the description below this video. One last thing before you go. Somewhere out there is a person who knows something. A neighbor who saw a car they could not place that night. A coworker who heard a comment that did not sit right. A relative of whoever wrote those letters who recognizes how that person writes. That person is more likely to come forward when they see a case being talked about than when they see it being forgotten. Hitting subscribe is a small action, but small actions are what keep cases visible long enough to be solved. If Nancy were your mother, your grandmother, your aunt, you would want every set of eyes you could get. So give her yours. Subscribe. Stay with this case. The next time something breaks, you will be the first to know. I will see you on the next one.